G'day viewers, it's Phil and Jen in the Philippines. Phil speaking, and welcome back to another vlog. Ah dear, where do I start? First of all, I'd like to thank all the subscribers and new subscribers. We put up a video yesterday, which was the second part of building a house in the Philippines and the debacles we went through and the end result. And all I can say is thank you for everyone's good wishes. I know I was even baffled doing it, that it turned out far better than I thought it would. Just in relation to that video, well, I'll put it to one side because it's actually a building video, and the reason for this video is probably after what occurred this morning and last night in relation to that video and the videos Jen and I have put online, and interaction between the subscribers and whatever. And also expats. I spent the morning doing two things. Obviously looking at other people's vlogs around the place just to keep up to date, and it's a form of entertainment, as it is for you people. I also watch vlogs, especially about areas that I know, like the Philippines, and I happen to be, as expats usually do, attending cafes where expats congregate. The interesting thing is, well, I better give you the theme for today's vlog, which is dispelling a lot of myths about the Philippines. And I've had a great deal of thought last night about it after reading the comments, and you know, because we're a young channel, we haven't got a huge amount of subscribers, and you've all been great and given me feedback and whatever. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to, with what I've got to say after dispelling some myths, probably lose some subscribers over what I'm about to say, but so be it. I don't want to lose any subscribers, but on the same token too, I'm prepared for it. Also, the content that Jen and I put in these vlogs, as I said beforehand, they're our opinion. But, you know, I started this vlog simply, I think, to help a lot of people, or attempt to help a lot of people that were contemplating coming to the Philippines, or coming to Southeast Asia for that matter, without being too specific, giving them my impressions and trying to minimize the amount of debacles, and that's why I highlight my debacles, hoping that you know, people see them and can learn from them. You know, I get so many people say, you know, like, oh, everything you're saying is negative, you know, people want to hear uplifting stories, you know, that's what people want. Well, I want to believe in the tooth fairy, you know, and Santa Claus, but it doesn't exist. You know, and the unfortunate thing about human nature is, you know, we usually remember the negatives of something rather than the positives. I don't want to be like every other vlogger. Jen doesn't want to be like every other vlogger and basically say, oh, everything's rosy in the Garden of Eden, and this is a little slice of paradise. It can be, and it is for a lot of people. But there's a lot of people that come to this country and other Southeast Asian countries wearing, you know, and bolted to their head, rose-coloured glasses. But we'll get onto that anyway at a later time at the end of the video, so please stick around. Dispelling some of the myths. Let's get onto the subject that I think is really important that people understand before they make the decision to come to the Philippines. The first myth is they travel a couple of times to places like the Philippines or Thailand or Cambodia or Laos or Vietnam for short periods of time, reconnoitering the countries for what they perceive to be a place that they're contemplating moving to. We're going to put the girls to one side. Forget that for the time being. They come out and they form an opinion in those short periods of time. But what you've got to understand is this. When you first come to a country, or even go to a new place in your own countries, you're virtually in holiday mode. And you have a tendency to look for all the wonderful things about it. And again, it's human nature to try to compound the positive things you preconceive about that particular place. So even if you come to Thailand for a month, you're one, in holiday mode, two, you're so ultra positive, three, you want to reinforce to yourself that you're on the right path and this is the right decision. And if you're only there for a month or so, you get on the plane and go home. Believe that you've reconnoitered the area. You'll do it probably another time just to make sure you're 100% right. And all you do the second time is reinforce what you found on the first time, your first trip. Again, it's not actual information because you're in the wrong frame of mind. You're holidaying. It's not until reality sets in, maybe 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, into such a big move, when you sit there and you realize this is my life, and you realize things are starting to bug you, and you realize that the things you imagine wouldn't happen have happened, that you start to understand that this is the reality of living in this particular place, whether it be the Philippines or Thailand or Bangkok or Hua Hin or Vietnam. Or this, all of a sudden it starts to filter through that this is life. And then you have a mental thing going on whether or not you made the right decision, but most people are pig-headed and they try to overcome it. And it's the same for the women. We'll get the women. My advice to all you guys out there is, the first thing, yes, the reason a lot of guys out there go online to find somebody is one, loneliness, of course, but getting away from the loneliness side, because loneliness occurs all over the world. They usually get online and talk to people with the vague intentions of possibly living overseas, and they're needing some form of prompting or some form of safety net, or they need to know somebody there to build up enough courage to actually do it. And the way they do it these days is they go online. That country, before you went online, may never have entered your head, but all of a sudden you strike up a relationship with a young lady that's saying all the right things, that's attractive, that's really dwelling on your insecurities, and she happens to come from the Philippines, or she happens to come from the Ukraine, or she happens to come from Vietnam, or you understand what I'm getting at. And therefore it starts to focus your attention on that country because you wish to obviously expand that relationship, and she's there, and for you to expand that relationship, for you to extend that relationship, you've either got to go there or she's got to come here, and all of a sudden you start concentrating on that one country when it never entered your head before. So to reinforce that concentration in that area, subconsciously you look for all the positive things about that country to reinforce the attitude, it mightn't be that bad, and then because you're only picking out the positives of that country, all of a sudden you build a case as to why you should be there. But the catalyst for that decision is usually some woman you've met online, you don't really know, and you are building mentally a life around somebody you don't know, in a situation you don't know, in a country you don't know. And time after time after time, I see the same thing. They never thought about the Philippines. That was the catalyst to make them look at it. So the first thing you've got to... So my advice to you is, if you feel comfortable having a frolic online with somebody just to get a feel of it, don't get too involved. I don't know how many guys have been involved in relationships, one within the space of a week, they're calling each other darling, and sweetie and all those things. It's fantasy, but the longer you do it, you reinforce in your own mind that this is right. She's darling, I've always been darling, and it is a creation of a love affair that really has no substance. So that's the first thing. This type of strange, perverted relationship that you're having online a lot of the time makes you do stupid things. And before too long, and before you know it, you've got two opposing things going on here. One, you've got curiosity and loneliness on one side, which is 9 times out of 10 the guys. And on the other side, you've got desperation, poverty, and a ticket out on the other side. And those two meet, and you feed off each other. And before you know it, circumstances take over. Before you even realise it, somehow you've become engaged online. It was a throwaway line, we should be engaged. And all of a sudden, it's compounded by continually talking about it. And then all of a sudden, you start admitting to people, oh, I got engaged online. And of course, when you eventually get out there, and even if you come out to visit this young lady to verify everything's A-OK, the mindset is, oh, this is my fiance. Now, we all know, even in our own countries, a lot of us when we're in the periods of youth, and a lot of we guys that have been divorced, the reality, if we look back on it, without getting into personalities and who's a bitch and who's a bastard and whatever, but let's think back to the first 12 months of the relationships, that we met our wives or past sweethearts. I know for a fact, I put up my best front when I was talking to women. I was, very conscious about projecting the best possible me to them because I had an attraction. I wanted things to work out. And she's doing exactly the same thing. Now, in our own countries, we have the benefit of being able to physically see them, a hell of a lot more than you can see these women over here because of distance. And we still, in our own countries, made mistakes because after 12 months, sometimes a lot less, after 6 months, that facade starts to fall. The energy in keeping up a facade of greatness starts to diminish. And people start to look at you as you really are, and you look at them as you really are, as they really are. We all know that. I'm preaching to the converted. You guys that don't want to believe that, know I'm talking the truth. Now, if we've stuffed up in our own countries and got involved in relationships that, and usually everyone has, and we've had the ability to see them every day on a physical basis. We know how they react to things. We know their facial expression. We know all these things, these nuances. And remember this, usually people in our own country, we know these things about how people react simply because we've had 20 or 30 years of conditioning to be able to recognize certain things in our own culture and whatever. So we know how a person in our own culture should react to things, how they should say things, how they should think about things, and yet we still continue to make mistakes when picking partners in our own countries. How much more difficult is it to pick the right partner when you've seen them half a dozen times at best? You've spoken to them where anything, on a medium where anything can be said and not verified, And yet, for some reason, the fear of loss, because she's promoting the fact of let's get married or let's do this or let's do that because you're her ticket out of poverty, out of the country, to a better life. All these things. So she's promoting her agenda. You're promoting yours. And you're doing it on a medium that makes it so difficult. And yet I see people falling for it time and time and time again. The best scenario is, okay, talk online. Take it with a grain of salt until you get into a situation for a decent period of time to be able to evaluate not so much what's been said, but more how it's been said and the motivations that brought forward the reasons why these girls say these things. So knowing all that, I've got to be honest. I hear it time and time again, and some people, fortunately I had a look, and most of them aren't subscribers, but they've commented. And they're usually bitchy comments about how they, someone ripped them off over here and this and negative things. The reality of the situation is I have absolutely not one iota of sympathy for these people at all. And I'm talking about the expats, as cold and as hard as that may be. you cannot claim ignorance anymore, gentlemen, because in the back of your head, you know that this is a fairy tale. And for everything I say, there's going to be exceptions to this rule. There's going to be guys out there that say, I met my wife online and we're fabulous and whatever. There's exceptions to every rule. But the vast majority of people that involve themselves online have very little chance of any longevity. At best, they don't get tangled up in this wicked weaving web of intrigue and disappointment, and they break it off fairly soon. Or they are, as we said, the very small minority of people, and good on them, that have met this way and have managed to forge a relationship, over many years, and are hysterically happy. And and I'm so happy. And I to a certain degree, am one of them, And I just recognize the fact how lucky I was. But it's a little bit different as far as our online relationship went, is because I physically met her long before we were forced through distance to get on Messenger and to get on WhatsApp and whatever, and to continue contact. But even after a number of years of visiting here and talking online almost every day, it wasn't until I was basically permanently here I realised how vast the chasm was culturally between myself and my now wife. And it took me a lot of work to understand her motivations of saying things, what she thought was funny, what I thought was funny, without going too deep. It was once the facade was dropped and we were ourselves, it was a total reassessment. And fortunately, I found a woman I love dearly and deeply, and we've been able to not make it work, it worked. But I'm one of the lucky ones. And it will work. I don't know for how long. It may be over tomorrow. It may be over in 5 years' time. It may never be over. But I can't preempt something like that because it hasn't happened. So my advice to you guys is, if you have to go online, you have to talk to these people just to get comfortable with and see, okay, what's available. Don't commit in any way, shape or form, and don't be rushed into any form of commitment. Get out here, suck the lolly and see if it's sweet, as far as see that it's everything you thought it was, and she's everything she portrayed herself to be. But if you contemplate coming to an Asian country, pull up those pants and show some balls. If you haven't got a woman, it's not the end of the world. Because I can guarantee you, as long as you're a reasonable guy, it doesn't matter what you look like or what situation you're in, there is a woman or women in countries like this that will accept you for what you are, who you are, how much you have, and they are good women. So come out here unafraid that you're going to be stuck here by yourself and lonely, and you may not be very good even with your own countrymen. You may not be as... I don't mix well with the expats here. I don't care. I have one or two good mates here, but I certainly am not an expat butterfly. I find it difficult. I find it inane, and I'm really sick of all the negativity, so I don't get involved. So I've always been a bit of a loner, a bit of a nutter, if that's what you want to say, but that's the way I live my life, and I'm quite comfortable with it. I want to encourage you guys, take heart. You don't have to have a woman here and have everything tied up in a nice, neat little bow to get on a plane, get your ass out here and experience this life for yourself, and then make up your mind whether or not you're going to stay for either an extended period of time, a retirement, or a lifetime. That's the first. I'll have my little rant and rave about online romances and whatever, and what I think. The second thing is dispelling another giant misnomer about Asian countries. is it's cheap to live there, and you can live like a king for 20 cents, and everything's cheap. You know, the women, you know, wall to wall. Now, as ridiculous as that sounds, that is what people perceive Southeast Asia to be. And that's the honey trap that destroys a lot of lives. This place is cheap for certain things. You know, and I want to say that, and I'll give you some examples. Yes, accommodation is cheap. Yes, land is cheap. Yes, building is cheap. You know, yes, the women are plentiful. They're all positive, stereotypical things that are correct. What isn't correct is, and taking it in relation to a Westerner coming to this country. Cigarettes are cheap, sorry. Booze is cheap. You know, whether that's good or bad, and I think that happens to be bad, it is true, they're cheap compared to our own home countries. Rentals, as I said, are cheap. But let's go back to the day-to-day living. And this is why I think budgets that are put on vlogs are so ridiculous. What isn't cheap in this country is anything outside the most basic of foods, supplementary foods that we require simply because our diets are such that we're, at our age especially, if you get to 55 and above, you are relatively set in your ways. And it's all very good to say, oh no, I can adapt to the diet. And even if you're in Thailand, because we're not brought up with that type of diet, you can maybe you're one of the lucky ones, and that's what you'll eat for the rest of your life. But it's been my experience that we wish to supplement eventually foods that we've been brought up with. Not all the time, but we do supplement. From potatoes, from steak, say for instance. All these things, and it may only be a little bit at a time. Certain sauces we can get from America. You know, rubs we can get on our pork. All these little things that remind us of home, we eventually get. If we're German, as I pointed out, sausage, a little bit of sauerkraut, pickles, just little luxuries. Now those things to supplement are hugely expensive. And eventually you get into a situation where that supplementary food stuff becomes a staple for you, so you mix it. But it's hugely expensive. Fuel, petrol, diesel is on par with the United States and Australia and places like that. So don't think you're going to come out here and everything's going to be cheap. To get round, and you need diesel and you need petrol, it's as expensive as home. And the distances don't change. Transport unto itself. Motor vehicles in this country are expensive. They don't produce any motor vehicles over here that aren't expensive, and most of the rest of the stuff is imported. And it is more expensive than the United States, far more expensive, even when we're talking new. More expensive than Australia, and one would imagine New Zealand and other places that we're going to come from. So we think second hand. Ridiculously more expensive. Some of the shit you buy here, second hand, you would not even take a second glance at in our own countries, and you are paying through the nose for it. Electricity, another staple. Expensive. Internet, on par, maybe a little bit cheaper, depending on what country you come from, but it's expensive, and now internet's a staple. And the quality of that internet, depending on where you are, is nowhere near a Western country. You know, some places, again, exceptions to the rule in this country, are as good, but the majority of time they're not. So depending on where you are, will depend on how good the internet is. Water, when you've got to continually buy water, and mainly, I don't know the rest of the world, but Australians drink straight out of the tap and don't think twice of it. Obviously there's bottled water available there, but push comes to shove, the majority of Australians just drink water out of the tap or chilled and whatever. You know, consumption of water in Southeast Asia is 100% purchased. And even though it's 25 pesos for, you know, X gallon container, you go through it like a dose of the salts. You know, and even the water that's pumped into your household is another payment. Labour is so cheap over here. Everyone says, "Oh, look, I can get a housekeeper, and it costs me 300 pesos a day. It's so cheap. It's so cheap." You know, but the majority of time with employees, the quality of their work is miserable, and you can't blame them because they're getting paid peanuts. So you can't. Maintenance on things, warranties don't exist in this country. So there's no avenue of complaint. So to do anything, the law, hugely expensive. Compared to the United States, healthcare is cheap compared to the United States and health insurances. But the quality is miserable. And people out there are going to say, "Oh no, there's a good hospital here, there's a good hospital there." You know, there may be. But on the whole, the medical system in this country is a complete and utter abortion. You have to actively seek out good medical practitioners, and good medical practitioners are expensive. And the reason I say they're expensive, for all the Australians out there will know, medical does not cost us anything on the whole in Australia. You know, doctor's visits. We have Medicare. It's a socialised medical system in Australia where, you know, medicine is free and available to all people in Australia of Australian citizenship. So it's so unusual for us to all of a sudden have to come and pay for medical. The other thing is, having all these things, you've got to have a pool of money that you don't usually have to have in Australia or the United States because you can always get by. But when push comes to shove, whether it be medical or whatever, you know, you've got to have the ability to drag in cash, an amount of money to, say, for instance, pursue any medical that you may require. And that may be inside the country, or you may have to get on a plane and go elsewhere. Dental's good over here and it is cheap. But again, you've got to separate the wheat from the chaff. So the misnomer that you're going to come over here and live so cheaply is that it's just an absolute lie when you start living here full time. If you think you can come over here with $800 a pension, if you think you can get off the plane with $3,000 in your pocket and know your pension's about to come in, it is a giant formula for absolute, you know, failure. Even though you've got, you know, the majority of people, I know a lot of pensioners, their money after a period of time just is not enough because it's been eroded away with small disasters here, there and everywhere. And you're in a cash society here. You know, there is very little credit available to you. And if shit hits the fan, it's so difficult to go and, whereas we would in our own countries, whiz round and get an extension on your credit card, you know, it just doesn't happen here. Everything is cash, or the majority of things are cash. You know, the other thing is too, once you get that through your head, if you can live in your own countries on your pension or close to it and live a subsistence lifestyle, the only thing that's going to occur when you come here, the quality of your life in some areas may go up. The ability to meet younger ladies obviously goes up compared to where we're from in the West. But if you are struggling, if you're living, you know, hand to mouth and you are missing out on meals and you can't pay for your medication, all this in your own country, and you've only got one form of income, the likelihood is you do not have enough money even to contemplate coming here. You'll become a Western peasant in an Asian country. Because unless you've got a buffer zone, a lot of the cons in these countries, a lot of the misunderstandings will drain that money away from you. And if you don't have a buffer between the rose-coloured glasses and the realisation of what is, somewhere in between those two areas, you're going to go broke and it's going to end up being a disaster. And the reason I'm telling you this is not to be negative, But like most medicines, for you guys that are delusional out there, that are dreamers out there, you know, that only want to hear the nice things, the positive things, you know, I can sit here like all the vloggers and tell you stories of how wonderful this is and wonderful that is, and paint the story and make you feel all warm and fuzzy, you know. And the reality is I'm doing it for myself so I can get greater subscribers, but I'm perpetuating a bullshit myth. And my words, if you take them, and I'm telling you these stories, are really responsible for somebody else's downfall, because they come here with my words ringing in their ears of how fabulous everything is and how easy it is, as a lot of vloggers do, and they come here ill-prepared and disaster strikes. So it's not that I'm negative. In fact, I'm probably one of the most positive people you'd ever meet. But I'm not going to turn around like everybody else and say, everything's great in the Garden of Eden. You know, that's it. I'm going to stop it, have another think, and then I'll come back.